My name is Olivia, and I've been driving trucks for 15 years. I've hauled everything from livestock to hazardous materials across every state in this country. And I thought I'd seen it all. That changed on a Tuesday night in September. Driving eastbound on I-80 through the Nevada desert with an empty trailer behind me. I'd just dropped off a load of electronics in California and was heading back to pick up my next shipment in Colorado. The night was unnaturally cold for late summer, and my dashboard thermometer kept fluctuating between readings that made no sense. Around 2:30 a.m., my CB radio started picking up chatter that made my skin crawl. Truckers were discussing details about my recent divorce, mentioning my ex-husband's name and talking about how I'd been driving solo runs to avoid going home to an empty house. The voices sounded familiar, like drivers I'd met at truck stops over the years. But they were saying things no stranger should know. I tried to break into the conversation, asking who was talking about me. But the moment I keyed my mic, the radio went silent. Dead silent, not even static. That's when I noticed my trailer weight sensors were showing numbers that didn't make sense. My empty trailer was registering as carrying a 15,000-pound load, and the weight kept increasing every time I checked. I pulled over at the next rest stop and walked back to inspect my trailer. The doors were still sealed with the locks I'd put on myself in California. Everything looked normal, but when I placed my hand on the trailer wall, I could feel a subtle vibration, like something was moving around inside. The weight readings continued climbing as I drove. 20,000 pounds. Then my truck was handling differently too, like I was actually pulling a heavy load up the mountain grades. The fuel consumption matched what I'd expect from a fully loaded rig. But those trailer doors hadn't been opened since I'd locked them myself. I started thinking about mechanical failures, sensor malfunctions, anything that could explain what was happening. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a technical problem. Around 4 a.m., I stopped at a 24-hour truck stop in Utah to use the restroom and grab coffee. When I came back to my truck, there was a small cardboard box sitting on my driver's seat. Inside was my high school class ring, the one I'd lost in a truck stop bathroom 3 states away 2 years ago. Underneath the ring was a Polaroid photo of my childhood bedroom, taken from the exact angle where I used to hide when my father came home drunk and angry. Nobody knew about that hiding spot. Nobody living. Anyway, my hands were shaking as I walked back to check my trailer again. This time, when I looked at the lock, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. The metal showed fresh scratches around the keyhole, and the serial number on the lock was different from the one I'd put on. Someone or something had replaced my lock with an identical one. I stood there for 20 minutes, key in hand, afraid to open those doors and see what was waiting inside. When I finally unlocked the trailer, the doors swung open to reveal dozens of cardboard boxes stacked from floor to ceiling. Each box was labeled with a different year from my childhood, written in my father's handwriting. The first box I opened contained cassette tapes with my father's voice calling my name, over and over, in the same threatening tone he used when he was about to lose his temper. The second box held more photographs of my childhood bedroom, but in these pictures, I could see a small figure cowering in the corner where I used to hide. I backed away from the trailer and started running. I ran across the parking lot, past the truck stop, and into the desert. I could hear my father's voice echoing from those boxes, calling my name, getting louder and more insistent with each step I took. The sound followed me for what felt like miles, until exhaustion finally forced me to collapse behind a cluster of Joshua trees. When the sun came up, I walked to the nearest highway and flagged down a state trooper. They found my truck 3 days later, parked exactly where I'd left it. The trailer was completely empty, no boxes, no locks, nothing. The weight sensors showed 0 load, and there was no evidence that anything had ever been stored inside. The truck stop's security cameras showed me talking to myself in the parking lot before running into the desert. According to the footage, I never opened the trailer doors. But I still have that class ring in my pocket, and sometimes, late at night, I can still hear my father's voice calling my name from somewhere far away. Listen, I'm Harley, and before you ask, no, I don't believe in ghosts or any of that supernatural garbage. 8 years driving truck, 5 years before that as an EMT, and I've seen enough real horror to know that dead people stay dead. That's what I used to tell myself, anyway. Before that night in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, when everything I thought I knew about the world got turned upside down and shaken, until it broke, October 28. Hauling medical supplies to rural hospitals up north, pushing through a snowstorm that had no business being that heavy so early in the season. Visibility was maybe 50 feet on a good stretch, and I was crawling along at 30 miles per hour with my hazards flashing. Following the white line like it was a lifeline, the GPS kept losing signal, but I knew this route well enough to drive it blind, or so I thought. Around 4 a.m., I passed mile marker 237, which I remembered from previous runs because of the weird way it was positioned, slightly crooked like someone had hit it with a plow truck. 10 minutes later, I passed mile marker 237 again, same crooked angle, same position relative to a burned-out barn I'd noticed on my first pass. I figured maybe I'd gotten turned around in the snow, maybe missed an exit or taken a wrong turn without realizing it. So I kept driving straight ahead, but 15 minutes after that, there it was again, mile marker 237, that same damn barn, everything exactly identical down to the specific pattern of snowflakes caught in my headlight beams. That's when I saw her standing by the road, this young woman in a summer dress and sandals, no coat, no hat, waving her arms at my truck like her life depended on it, in the middle of a blizzard, dressed for a beach party. And she didn't look cold at all. I pulled over, because that's what you do when you see someone who needs help. Even when every instinct in your body is screaming that something's wrong with the picture. She climbed into my cab, and her skin was warm, almost feverish. But she wasn't shivering or showing any signs of hypothermia. Her name was Jessica, she said, and she needed to get to town because her car had broken down miles back. Sweet kid, maybe 22. Kept talking about how she was supposed to meet her boyfriend at some party and how worried he'd be if she didn't show up. Normal conversation, except for the way she kept glancing at my speedometer and asking me to drive faster, even though we were already pushing the limits of safety in that storm. Every time I tried to ask her about being out in summer clothes during a snowstorm, she'd change the subject or start talking about something else entirely. We passed mile marker 237 again, and again, each time, Jessica got more agitated, more desperate, begging me to drive faster, to find a way out of this stretch of highway. She started crying, then screaming, telling me that we had to get past the marker, or something terrible was going to happen. That's when my CB radio crackled to life with a voice from dispatch. But the timestamp was wrong, showing October 28, 1993. The voice was reporting an accident at mile marker 237, single vehicle collision, young female victim, deceased on arrival. Jessica went quiet when she heard the radio transmission. She looked at me with eyes that were suddenly ancient and sad, and she told me the truth. She'd been driving this same route 30 years ago, hit a patch of black ice right at mile marker 237, lost control, and wrapped her car around a tree. She'd been trying to get to a Halloween party to meet her boyfriend, wearing that summer dress because it was supposed to be her costume. She died instantly, but somehow, she'd been trapped in this loop ever since, reliving the moments before her accident over and over. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night, the thing that proves this wasn't just some hallucination brought on by fatigue and bad weather. Jessica told me that my truck was about to experience brake failure. The same kind of mechanical problem that would cause me to lose control at exactly the same spot where she died. Every loop we'd been driving was my consciousness trying to prevent my own death. And she'd been trying to warn me, because she didn't want anyone else to join her in that endless repetition. I slammed on my brakes and brought the truck to a complete stop about 100 yards before mile marker 237. Jessica smiled at me, touched my hand one last time, and then she was gone, just dissolved into the air like she'd never been there at all. I sat there for 20 minutes, engine running, afraid to move forward. When I finally started driving again, I passed mile marker 237 once, normally, and kept going. The storm cleared, my GPS signal returned, and everything went back to normal. Later, I researched the accident records for that stretch of highway and found Jessica Morrison, age 22, killed in a single vehicle accident on October 28, 1993, at mile marker 237. The photo in the newspaper showed her wearing the exact same summer dress I'd seen that night.
Name's Charlie. Been running these highways for 25 years, and I've made it my business to look out for the younger drivers coming up in this industry. You see, trucking's got its own culture, its own language, and we take care of our own out here. That's why what happened on the I-40 corridor shook me to my core, because it meant one of us, someone we trusted, someone who spoke our language and knew our ways, had turned predator. It started with Jimmy Kowalski going missing between Little Rock and Nashville. Good kid, maybe 6 months on the road, always checked in with his dispatcher every 4 hours like clockwork. Then his truck turned up at a rest stop in Tennessee, keys still in the ignition, logbook open to his last entry. But Jimmy was gone. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing. Just vanished like smoke in the wind. A week later, same thing happened to Maria Santos outside Memphis. Then Big Dave Peterson disappeared near Jackson. 3 drivers, same route, same mysterious circumstances. The CB chatter was getting nervous, drivers sharing information, trying to piece together what was happening. That's when I started hearing the voices. Late at night, around 2 or 3 a.m., someone would come on Channel 19 pretending to be one of the missing drivers. The voice would sound exactly right, same speech patterns, same slang, but there was something underneath it, something cold and hungry that made your skin crawl. They'd ask innocent questions about routes and schedules, trying to get solo drivers to reveal their locations and destinations. I remember the night I heard Jimmy's voice on the radio, calling for help, saying he was broken down at mile marker 312 and needed someone to bring him fuel. The voice was perfect, down to Jimmy's slight Boston accent and the way he always said buddy at the end of his sentences. But Jimmy had been missing for 3 weeks, and I'd been to his funeral 2 days earlier. Someone was using his voice, his mannerisms, his CB handle, to lure other drivers into a trap. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with random highway crime. This was someone who knew us, who understood trucker culture well enough to mimic it perfectly. Someone who could copy voices and knew personal details about drivers he'd never officially met. I started keeping a list, cross-referencing the fake radio calls with actual trucker schedules and routes. The pattern was terrifying in its sophistication. Our killer wasn't just picking random victims, he was studying us, learning our habits, our routes, our personal lives. The breakthrough came when I heard my own voice on the CB radio. I was sitting in my cab at a truck stop outside Little Rock, listening to someone who sounded exactly like me asking a young driver named Pete to meet me at an abandoned way station for convoy coordination. The voice knew details about my family, my routes, even my truck's specifications. I grabbed my mic and started broadcasting warnings, telling every driver on the channel that it wasn't me. But by then, the damage was done. Pete was already rolling toward the trap. I called in backup through my network of trusted drivers, and we converged on that way station like we were planning a military operation. What we found there changed everything I thought I knew about evil. The killer was another trucker, someone I'd shared coffee with at truck stops, someone who'd been part of our community for years. His trailer wasn't carrying freight, it was carrying trophies, personal items from every driver he'd killed, arranged like some sick museum display. He'd been using CB scanners and voice modulation equipment to record and replay our conversations, building a database of voices and personal information. The man could become any of us with the flip of a switch, and he'd been using that ability to hunt us one by one. When we surrounded him, he tried to run, but there's nowhere to hide an 18-wheeler from a dozen other trucks with their coordinates locked in. The police found evidence linking him to 17 murders across 12 states, spanning 8 years. 17 truckers who'd trusted the wrong voice on the radio, who'd responded to calls for help that were really invitations to their own deaths. During his confession, he told the investigators that he'd chosen truckers because we were already isolated, already suspicious of outsiders, and because our community's strength, our willingness to help each other, was also our greatest vulnerability. I still drive these highways, still coordinate convoys and look out for the younger drivers, but everything's different now. Every voice on the CB radio gets verified twice, every request for help gets checked and double-checked. Because I learned that evil doesn't always come from outside our community, sometimes it grows within it, wearing our faces and speaking our language, waiting for the moment when trust becomes a weapon and brotherhood becomes a hunting ground. I go by Malachi, and before I tell you what happened during that week in September, you need to understand something about classified government transport. 20 years military, 10 of those running special cargo that doesn't officially exist, and I thought I'd seen every kind of weird the government could throw at me. I was wrong, dead wrong, and I'm still not sure if what happened was real, or if my mind finally snapped under the weight of too many classified missions and not enough sleep. The job came through the usual channels: encrypted communication, pickup coordinates, delivery timeline. Simple run from a facility outside Austin to a location in rural Maine. 7-day window, midnight to 6 a.m. driving only, no exceptions. The cargo manifest was coded, but that wasn't unusual for government work. What was unusual was the way every piece of electronics within 100 yards of my truck started malfunctioning the moment I backed up to the loading dock. Cell phones died, radios went to static. Even the facility's security cameras flickered and went dark whenever I got close. First night out, everything seemed normal except for the electronic interference. My GPS would reset itself every few minutes. My CB radio picked up nothing but white noise, and my dashboard instruments kept cycling through random readings. I attributed it to some kind of electromagnetic pulse from whatever I was hauling, probably military hardware or scientific equipment. But somewhere around 3 a.m. driving through Oklahoma, I started losing time. Not falling asleep at the wheel, actual gaps in my memory where I'd be at 1-mile marker, and suddenly find myself 50 miles down the road with no recollection of the drive between. By the third night, the electronic problems had spread beyond my truck. Every truck stop I pulled into would experience power fluctuations, and other truckers started complaining that their equipment went haywire whenever I parked nearby. People began acting strange around me too, speaking in stilted, unnatural patterns, asking questions that seemed rehearsed. A waitress at a diner in Missouri asked me about my previous assignments in cognitive restructuring programs, and then looked confused, like she didn't remember saying it. The memory gaps got worse. I'd find notes in my own handwriting that I didn't remember writing, directions to locations that weren't on any map, reminders about procedures I'd never learned. My logbook showed entries in my handwriting describing cargo inspections I'd never performed and conversations with dispatch that had never happened. Most disturbing were the medical notations, documenting symptoms I was experiencing but hadn't told anyone about, written in terminology I shouldn't have known. On the 5th night, I decided to look at the cargo manifest while stopped at a rest area in Pennsylvania. The moment I opened the folder, reality tilted sideways. The manifest listed my full name, military service number, and psychological profile as the primary cargo item. Below that were dozens of sub-entries, describing memory reconstruction protocols, reality perception modification, and subject behavioral monitoring during controlled narrative scenarios. According to the paperwork, I wasn't the driver. I was the shipment. I broke the seals on the cargo area and found row after row of identical metal containers, each one labeled with my name and service number. Inside the first container was recording equipment still running, documenting every word I'd spoken, every decision I'd made during the trip. The second container held medical monitoring devices that had apparently been tracking my vital signs, brain activity, and stress responses. The third container was filled with video screens showing surveillance footage of every truck stop, every rest area, every location I'd visited during the journey. But the final container broke me completely. Inside were transcripts of conversations I'd had with military psychiatrists about experimental programs I couldn't remember participating in. The documents described volunteer subjects who'd undergone memory modification procedures, their consciousness placed into elaborate simulated scenarios to test the effectiveness of the treatments. According to the files, I'd been a patient at a military medical facility for months, and this entire trucking job was a therapeutic exercise designed to help me process repressed memories of my involvement in classified psychological experiments. The destination turned out to be the same medical facility where I'd apparently been a patient. When I arrived, the doctors were waiting for me, explaining that the simulation had been successful in helping me recover suppressed memories of my voluntary participation in their research. They showed me footage from the truck's hidden cameras, proving that everything I'd experienced was real, that the electronic anomalies and strange behavior were genuine effects of the experimental technology I'd been exposed to during my military service. But here's what keeps me awake at night. What makes me question everything they told me? In that footage, during the moments when I was experiencing memory gaps, the cameras show me having conversations with people who weren't there, following instructions from voices that weren't on the audio recording. Either I'm a recovering test subject whose treatment is working, or I really did transport cargo that exists beyond the boundaries of normal reality. The evidence supports both explanations equally, and I'll never know which version of the truth is real. If these stories have left you questioning the nature of reality and the secrets hidden in the darkest corners of our world, make sure to subscribe to Mysterious Clicks and hit that notification bell, because we're just getting started exploring the unexplained mysteries that lurk in the shadows of everyday life.